Everyone, I'm Tracy Noah from the Marion Library Service and welcome to our Library Through the Lens live webinar with special guest author Lisa Walker in conversation with Joe Case. Since the closure of our libraries and venues, we've been working hard to still connect and engage with you through our Library Through the Lens series of adult programs delivered differently. We had to reimagine how to bring you the author talks that you've grown to expect from us, so thank you for joining us today. This afternoon, Lisa introduces us to her second YA novel, The Girl with the Gold Bikini, a body-positive detective romp with a fun new spin on Nancy Drew and girl detectives. Please feel free at any time during the presentation to type questions you have for Lisa into the Q&A text box on your screen, and later I will ask her some of your questions. Now sit back, relax, and please welcome Lisa and Joe.
Thanks, Tracy. It's so lovely to be spending the afternoon having a chat to Lisa about her book.
Great to be here.
I hear it's raining outside where you are, Lisa.
Yeah, it's raining again now, but no hail at the moment. So
oh, that's good. That's good. And for anyone watching, you can set the beautiful sliver of image you can see behind Lisa is part of her book cover, which is a very nice backdrop. So Lisa, I just absolutely loved this book. It was one of those moments where I just felt very lucky to be working where I do, which is at Wakefield Press. The YA publisher Margot gave me a copy of the manuscript to have a look at and said, you know, see what you think. And I read the first line and I was like, I hope it continues like this. And we'll all get a taste of that in a minute because Lisa is going to read the first couple of pages of the book. But before that, I just wanted to ask you about Olivia Grace, PI, who, as I just said, I fell in love with from the first wisecracking line of the book. Olivia is an endearingly flawed heroine. She's both whip smart and a bit awkward, prone to tangling herself in trouble and to solving it. And in her cargo pants and t-shirts and with her affinity for Star Wars, she's refreshingly ungirly, though she still likes trying on different disguises and personalities as part of the job. I wonder if you can tell us a bit, Lisa, about the process of creating Olivia and how she came to you in the first place.
yeah, look, I actually started writing this book about 15 years ago, if you can believe it. Yeah, so long ago. And at the time I was, you know, reading a lot of crime novels and I loved that kind of feisty girl detective kind of genre. And Olivia started to come to me and inspired quite a lot by the time I spent on the Gold Coast as a teenager. You know, Olivia's a curvy girl in a world of bikini beach bodies, and she never really feels like she fits the image of that she should be on the Gold Coast. She feels a bit out of place, and you know, I was never really a bikini girl either myself, and so Olivia's, I suppose there's quite a lot of my teenage self in her. She's obsessed by Nancy Drew. I love Nancy Drew, and you know, she's always wanted to be a detective. That's all she's ever wanted. And even though she actually doesn't know very much about being a detective, apart from what she's read in the Nancy Drew books, you know, she's going to give it a red hot shot.
Well, you know, who does know much about being a real life detective when you're 18 years old and it's your first job out of high school?
That's it, yeah. So she's just left school and landed this, you know, dream job, which she's desperate to hang on to, although she's finding it a bit hard to begin with. And her boss is her old childhood friend, so there's kind of an interesting dynamic between them as well.
Yes, yes. And I might ask you a bit more about that dynamic when we come back from you reading the first couple of pages of the book.
Yeah. Shall I do that now?
Yeah, please do.
Okay.
I think it's a really nice setup for everyone.
Whenever I see a girl in a gold bikini, I think of Princess Leia. Here on the Gold Coast, gold bikinis are common, so I think of Princess Leia a lot. Princess Leia doesn't stand for any nonsense. When the giant slug made her wear that ridiculous bikini, she whipped out her chain and gave it a thrashing. Then she changed quick smart into something more sensible. Dance with the hottest crowd in town. Our stunning waitresses will ensure Punching the radio off button, I squeeze my car into a metered spot near Cavill Avenue and glance at my watch. Late again. The good thing about working in Surfers Paradise is that the meter maids will be along soon to stick money in the meter. That's if they don't recognise my parents' bombed out Daihatsu, in which case they'll know I'm no tourist, but a shameless leech on the system. I jog up the street, jumping sideways to avoid getting wiped out by a guy with a 9-foot surfboard on his head. A tout calls out from the doorway, gesturing towards his shop. Get your stuffed koalas, didgeridoos, and the Kubra hats here, folks. Well, that's what I think he's saying. As I don't speak Japanese, it's hard to be sure. I nod at the tout. He nods back. Seiji's All-Australian souvenir shop and outback bar is my regular lunchtime haunt. I don't buy much, but it's always quiet in there compared to the hustle bustle of the street. Seiji is nice. He never seems to mind if my ice cream drips. He's a good salesman too. As I push through the door of Gold Star Investigations, I pause to savour the thrill it gives me. Here I am, straight out of school, and already a private investigator in training. It's funny though, how when dreams come true, they're never quite what you expect. I hadn't thought it would be so hard to work with Roscoe. He and I are no strangers. We grew up on the same street in Southport. He was 1 year ahead of me in school, but we hung out together after hours. Roscoe was Luke Skywalker and Han Solo to my Leia. We took turns to play Yoda, and very accomplished in Yoda speak we were. The Force was with us. I misheard this phrase the first time he said it, before I watched the movies, and the horse is with you became our little in-joke. Roscoe ditched me as a playmate when he turned 10, and I didn't see much of him for a while. It soon became clear that he hadn't ditched me to hang out in the skate park with the other boys, though. Roscoe had his eyes on broader horizons. He started his first business when he was 11, selling funky cats online. At 14, he switched to designing apps for businesses and made some serious money. Now, he's thrown all this capital into opening Gold Star Investigations. The Gold Coast, he says, is crying out for PIs. He's changed a lot since we were playmates, but I suppose I have too. Roscoe's been in business for 6 months, and I am his first employee. My relationship with him as CEO is different to when he was Han Solo. From the moment I started, a week ago, he's treated me like an IQ challenge sidekick. My role is clear. I am not Princess Leia, Nancy Drew, or even Batgirl. No, I am Watson to his Sherlock, Hastings to his Poirot, Robin to his Batman.
Thanks, Lisa. Feels weird not to hear applause after that, so I'll
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
I think that's a really lovely little intro to the book, and also to just one of the things I love is the way that you seed all of these pop culture references through it as well. I just found it really fun when I was reading. Was that something that just kind of found its way into the book, or something you'd planned to do, especially I suppose with the riffing off Veronica Mars and Nancy Drew and Star Wars?
Look, it's not something I've planned to do, but that sort of thing does weave its way into all of my books, I find. Yeah, and I'm not sure why that is, but it's just a way of, bringing the setting and the characters to life, I think.
Yeah. And is that fun for you as well? Because it's fun to read.
Yeah, no, I do. I love it. It's just those quirky little things that I suppose tickle my imagination, and I like to pop them in there. And I think, that's something my character might like.
Yeah. So do you kind of think that if you're amusing yourself as you're writing, that hopefully you're amusing the reader as well? Or
yes, absolutely. And there's nothing worse than writing away and thinking, oh, this is actually a little bit ho-hum now. And and I really didn't have that writing this book. There's so much going on all the time that I did actually find it quite a joyful experience to write, because it was always like, oh my goodness, what's she going to do next?
Well, that definitely comes through, and there is that screwball element to it as well that I really loved. It's, you know, very madcap, a lot of physical comedy, you know, Olivia getting into all of these scrapes, like when she's, just one example, when she's watching a yoga video because she's about to pass herself off as a yoga instructor, even though she's never done yoga. And she, you know, entangles herself like by using props, like it gets herself all tied up. Just stuff like that. It's very funny to read. I know that you're you've said you're a fly by, you know, by the seat of your pants kind of writer. You make it up as you go along. But I wonder, with a book like this that has all of these set pieces, did you have to plan more, or was it a matter of just going back and making it all fit together?
Yes, the second. This book, I felt like I was juggling a lot, you know, it's sort of like, and I ended up with what I felt like was a big plate of tangled up spaghetti. You know, it's just like, there's so many, you know, plot lines going on and things happening. And I felt like it was never going to make any sense or come together. And in fact, I don't think it really did in the first draft. It was, so I had a lot of stuff going on, but but I had to go back then and kind of work through it in a more sensible way and try and, because I felt like I had a lot of balls in the air and I dropped a lot of them on the way by the time I got to the end of the first draft. Yeah.
Did you know where you were heading when you wrote the first draft? Did you know how the mystery, like what the mysteries would be, like with all the subplots and how it would be solved in the end, or were you really just discovering that as well as you went?
No, I was totally discovering that as I went too. So it was all a complete surprise to me, and in fact that's the only way I seem to be able to write, because as soon as if I know what's going to happen, I've got no excitement to write towards. You know, it's only when you get those amazing twists and go, oh, I never could have thought of that. And I find that quite amazing, to how some people can actually, you know, do that plotting beforehand, because it's not something that I can ever do. There's no way I could sit down and plot out a novel like this. I just couldn't conceptualize it. I just have to wait and see what's going to happen around the corner.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, because I'd always thought that to write a mystery, you must have, you know, like a wall full of Post-it notes that all go together. But obviously, you know, it's something you can reverse engineer. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it was quite confusing to me a lot of the time. And to my early readers too, they were sort of like, I've got no idea what's happening here. So there was a lot of that kind of explaining that I needed to do, because there was so much going on. Yeah.
And you mentioned that that this book is one that you started 15 years ago. It's actually your 6th novel to be published, is that right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So I wonder, I mean, that's quite a bit of tenacity in continuing on with it, obviously, while you had these other projects in the background. Was there something really special about this one that kept you coming back to it?
Yeah, I always loved Olivia, and I think that's what I kept wanting to get back to her. So it was there, and really, I suppose there was probably quite a few years I didn't work on it, but I always thought that she had something. And then I guess after my first young adult novel came out, it was after that I thought, oh, I really think I'm going to go back and see what I can do with Olivia, because I loved her. She's so much fun. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I can see that. And like I say, that was the first thing that I fell in love with the book, was just her voice. So I can see why that would work for you as a writer too. What do you think it is that you love about girl detective novels and stories?
They're really empowering, I think, for girls to see. But I mean, from a personal point of view, I just love to see girls sort of taking control and solving problems, and you know, being out in the real world, you know, just taking charge and being what they can be and all that kind of thing. So I think that's what I love about it. You know, it's a little bit of a fantasy, because I guess you don't actually see girls of that age out there doing that kind of thing, but I love to see it. Yeah.
I wonder, like, there's something in the girl detective, in like observing things going on and then making a kind of sense out of it and a story out of it and solving it that has a kind of affinity with the writing process. Do you think there's anything in that?
Yeah, you're right. There is. Yeah, there's. She's just, you're just finding your way through in the same way that I am when I'm writing. So it's like, oh, what's happening there? That's weird. I can't believe that just happened, and this sort of thing. And the funniest things, of course, pop up in the story. It's just, there's one scene there where Olivia's shopping and someone sort of pops out in the freezer and hands her something. And that actually, I was happy, that kind of happened to me, because I went shopping and I was, over in the freezer section, and someone sort of popped up behind the frozen goods, and I sort of thought, oh my goodness, I didn't realise people did that. and then I just had to write that in there.
That's fantastic, because that was actually one of the moments that I was like, oh, well, that's a wonderful invention, but that doesn't come from life at all, because it pops out of the freezer.
Yeah, well, that's it. There was someone in there stocking, obviously, but it's just I never sort of opened a freezer door to get something out before and seen someone there. It's like,
It's a great image. I think one of the things I really loved about reading this book too, and I think one of its great pleasures, is its people watching, actually, and the details that you've observed and that Olivia observes of these two exotic places that she's moving between, the Gold Coast and Byron Bay, which I think are the kind of places that, unless you live there, you know a lot about, but from maybe a bit of a stereotypical point of view. Even though I think that you do a great job in this book of showing us some of these stereotype characters, but you make them not stereotypes, you make them their own. And I wonder if you can tell us a bit about that process.
Yeah, well, I lived just south of Byron Bay, and I moved here about 20 years ago and found it a really interesting place, and immediately started writing about it. And as I said, I spent a lot of time on the Gold Coast, and always had a bit of a love-hate relationship with it. And so I suppose it's just looking around when you come to a place fresh, as I did to Byron, all those strange things about it kind of popped out at me, and so I absorbed that, like the way every second person seems to be a yoga instructor, and that a really intense yoga instructor, and that the surfing scene, the strange people you see in the surf. And yeah, it's just and I went back, of course, because I live about an hour's drive south of the Gold Coast now, so I went back there a few times while I was writing the book, and took my kids to the theme parks and did sort of all that crazy sort of Surfers Paradise stuff, and yeah, just took some notes and absorbed that. Yeah, so I mean, I didn't really need to do location scouting so much for Byron, because I was just up there all the time. But when I was there, I was suddenly, just sitting in Johnson Street having a coffee and watching the world go by. It's kind of, it's a really interesting street scene, and similarly on the Gold Coast, but quite a different street scene. And they're quite contrasting sort of locations.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it's really interesting moving between the two of them, because they're both these exotic tourist destinations, but quite different. So you get this kind of contrast. And I never knew they were so close together. A 40-minute drive between the two of them.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm a bit south, so it's an hour for me. But yeah, from Byron to the Gold Coast, about 40 minutes, yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's very fertile ground to be mining to write about. So.
Yeah. And, of course, Olivia sort of, sees it's funny because a lot of people in Queensland, to go over the border to New South Wales is kind of a big deal for them, strangely, even though it's sort of right there. So, Olivia's coming from that perspective too, that she never actually went to Byron Bay all through her childhood. So it's kind of like a strange place for her. She says that, she used to think it was almost like baby dragons south of the border of Queensland kind of thing. And so, yeah, she's quite excited by having gone over the border.
Yeah, and I kind of like that she discovers it as this beautiful exotic place. Like she sees it for when she first goes there, she sees the rainforest and she goes surfing, and so she's experiencing it just almost in the sense of doing things and immersing herself in the landscape. rather than observing the personalities and things. But when she goes back after a while to investigate this case, she's seeing it in terms of all of those strange little personalities and conflicts that pop up. So you kind of get the experience of it, but also this anthropological view. Was that something that, that those two kind of perspectives that you wanted to get in the book? Or did they
well, I suppose it just happened because everything kind of just happens. But yeah, so the first time Olivia goes there, she's kind of naive, I guess. You know, she sort of first went to Byron when she was 16, I think, and just saw it as this amazing paradise where, you know, the rainforest comes down to the sea and the water's crystal clear, and it is all those things. But then coming back as a detective, of course, she's looking at a completely different side of it, and there is that side of it too. You know, it does have that sort of darker underbelly. Yeah.
It actually reminded me the feel of the book of that kind of, you know, the crime set in bright sunshiny places that you read more in America, you know, like the Florida noir or LA noir. Did you have those kinds of texts as references at all? Or
Yeah, actually I was reading a bit of what's his name, Hyson, who writes. Yeah, I can't remember his first name, but he writes about Carl Hyson, he writes all that sort of Florida stuff, and I was reading a lot of that, so that probably worked its sense of that in there. I do like his books. I like it, you know, they're quite amusing, but he's got the alligators in the swamps and, you know, all that kind of strange stuff down there.
That's so interesting, because your book did remind me in a sense like of Hyson, actually. So,
good.
Yeah, which is a compliment, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I love him.
Another thing that I think is really great about this book is the way that you explore body positivity through Olivia. From the way that she resists pressure from her appearance-conscious grandmother, who is hilarious, and to the way that her 7-year-old sister Jack, she plays soccer, she loves Lego. And in one little moment that I just quite loved, you know, her grandmother gives her a birthday gift of like hair accessories and things, which is the kind of thing that little girls get given all the time at the moment. And she's just kind of bemused. Lego tower. And I wondered if you could talk about that body positive element of the book and how important that was to you.
Yeah, so yeah, Olivia's, as I said, she's kind of a curvy girl, and she does live in this world of the Gold Coast, which you can imagine, yeah, there's a lot of bikini beach body sort of stuff going on there, as there is in Byron Bay. And she just never really buys into that, which I kind of like about her. It's not like she's at all bothered by it, really. Yeah, so that was important to me, that she just was always kind of imperfect in a sense, but totally accepting of the way she was, and you know, just carrying on with herself, eating her Mars bars and wearing her cargo pants, and similarly with her sister. Yeah, so I just wanted to work that in there as well. So we do have the contrast, of course, of the grandma who's you know, kind of 60 but looks 30 sort of thing, because she's getting a lot of stuff done and always elegantly dressed, even if she's just going down to pick up the milk or whatever. And you know, Olivia, couldn't you lift your game a bit? You know, why don't you do your hair like Taylor Swift, or you know, this sort of stuff. Yeah, but Olivia's just kind of quite dismissive of all that, and yeah, and obviously she's sort of her sister, quite a role model for her younger sister, who's kind of not buying into all that either.
No, and you mention it's just like a line dropped in the book, so it's not super obvious, but you know, at one point she says that her mother just like, she works outside. I think she's a landscape lecturer at TAFE or something, and
yeah,
she gets around in drip dry clothes and doesn't care either. So you just have this little seed that, you know, of her being modelled something that she's not about what she looks like, she's about what she does, which I think is really lovely.
Yeah.
And
yes,
then,
but of course the grandmother's very disappointed in Olivia's mother as well. So.
Yeah, and I think by having it, by having the grandmother, who they don't normally live with, as the one who is this element of like, oh, why don't you do something more with your hair? But you know, they've got these grounded role models. It's just a fun little element rather than something that is a real looming challenge. It's never not really a challenge for Olivia. I love that too, that body positivity is in the story, but it's not something she's fighting against. It's just kind of there and annoying.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's not, it's not a big deal for her. She's aware of it, but it's not like she's going, oh my God, I wish, I had a bikini beach body. Yeah.
Just focusing on other things like surfing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, I wonder if we can talk a little bit about the meaning of the surfing subplot for Olivia, but also for you. I know that surfing is something, you've written a beautiful piece about how writing is like surfing for you and how you've found great metaphors in there. And for Olivia, surfing is something she used to do when she was younger, and then she had a traumatic experience and was not doing it anymore. Can you perhaps talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So Olivia's given up surfing following an assault that happened to her the first time she was in Byron Bay, and it happened on the beach, so it's kind of put her off the whole thing. But as part of her character arc and as part of becoming a detective, she actually takes up surfing again as part of her going undercover and all that kind of stuff. And so it's quite a challenge for her at first. She's getting her board out of the garage and dusting it down and sort of feeling quite a lot of trepidation about going out in the water again. But then, of course, she's getting into it, and she gets dumped and she gets going again. And so that's kind of her development throughout the book, is the taking up of surfing, which is at the same time showing how she's getting back her mojo and taking back her power. And so I'm a keen surfer. I live in a really great place for surfing, and I'm aware that surfing is something that's really difficult to learn, in the same way that writing is. So, for me, and the two things sort of happened at the same time for me. So they went along in parallel. I was learning to surf, learning to write, and and neither of those things are easy.
And I guess with both of them, there's a combination of skills and also a feeling.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So there's that. You have to work hard for those feelings.
Yeah.
You do. And the surfing, it's like, I suppose it's when I first started surfing, it was like, I'm going to challenge myself to go out and just stay out in the water for an hour because it's terrible. And writing is, to some extent like that. There's a lot of sort of going, oh, I don't feel like writing. But if you just sit down at the desk and, put your fingers to the keyboard and keep going, eventually you're going to get some words down. And, after a while, if you keep at it, those words are going to get better. And eventually you're going to have a day where everything's just amazing. And, you're going to go, wow, that was great. Something amazing happened there.
Yeah. So I guess that with both of them, it's something that you've got to work at it, but also it's really important to enjoy it.
Yeah, it is. But writing's not always a joy, No. And I guess, sometimes I think we as writers give the impression that it is always a joy, and people listening to us might think, oh, this actually isn't feeling all that joyful at the moment. And to be honest, it isn't always, but I think you need to have that awareness that sometimes it is, and those moments when it is joyful, and also that feeling of achievement when you get sort of moments of inspiration and you've written something you're proud of, then those are the things that sort of keep you coming back.
Yeah, actually, that's a very good point. And maybe it's more about just appreciating the moments of joy when they come, rather than expecting them to be there all the time, perhaps.
Yeah. There's a lot of paddling out and getting dumped.
Beautiful metaphor. Beautiful.
Yeah.
I think there's a piece of advice that Olivia gets from another character who I really loved, Maya. She's a female surfing champion who Olivia just kind of runs into in the waves at Byron when she's first out surfing again, who gives her a piece of advice ostensibly about surfing, but really also it's something that carries over to Olivia's approach to life. She says, "You need to commit more. Ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? I wonder if you can just talk a bit about that advice.
Yeah, so yeah, Olivia does take on that advice that you know, sometimes you just really need to throw yourself into something, and holding back can be the worst thing. So yeah, she does that sort of both in a metaphorical sense with her detective work, and also physically in the surf when she's out there once and a huge wave comes and she's paddling and she realizes that if she pulls up back now, she's just actually just going to get totally dumped. So she's just got to go for it. And that's the way she throws herself into her work as well. So she's a real go-getter kind of girl. If something needs to happen, she's going to be out there at the shark pool, you know, sort of going undercover as a very bad yoga instructor, whatever it is that it takes. She's just going to throw herself in there.
Well, I guess she's actually a great, she's one of the things that's great about her is the fact that she makes mistakes and then she just dusts herself off and keeps on going, you know, and that she's not afraid to make a fool of herself, which is partly great because it's really funny when it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, no, she's quite, I mean, you know, we never want to see, yes, a Wonder Woman sort of character is kind of not quite as fun as someone who actually does sort of end up getting tangled up and, you know, needs to be rescued every now and again perhaps, but not all the time.
Well, I actually think it's perhaps more empowering too to see a character who isn't perfect, who's not like a Wonder Woman and is superhero and can do anything, but a character who just tries and occasionally triumphs and sometimes, you know, falls down, has to pick herself up.
Yeah, and Olivia has a lot of self-doubt, you know. It's not like she always thinks that things are going to go well for her, but she's sort of like, well, I've always wanted to be a detective, I've just got to keep on trying.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I like that she occasionally loses her temper and does something stupid as well, like eating 4 Mars bars.
That's it. Yeah, she has a bad effect when she eats too many Mars bars.
We won't give that away, except for just watch out for it. It's really fun. Before I throw over and let other people answer questions, I did want to say to talk about an element of the novel that I thought was really interesting, which is there's both yoga and surfing, which are these iconic Byron Bay pursuits. You explore them in terms of both them as a spiritual pursuit and as something that you do as a commercial pursuit or as kind of a measure of achievement.
Yeah.
Both of those, you've got like characters that represent each way of looking at these things. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, well, it is a big thing, in as you say, in both those, and probably in a whole lot of things, you know, that desire just to do something because it's a beautiful thing to do, and it makes you at one with the world and makes you feel healthy, and the desire to monetize that. And yeah, so I think we've seen that with both surfing and yoga over recent years. Because, yeah, I mean, who could have predicted that yoga would end up the way it was with, you know, these sort of huge, you know, yoga rock stars charging huge amounts to go to their classes. And if you want to buy their yoga mat, you know, that's $150. And if you want to buy the t-shirt, that's another $150. And similarly with the surfing, because of course back in the 60s it was all very, you know, soul surfing kind of thing. And yeah, so I've got these two surfer characters who, as you say, are at odds with each other. One of them's just sort of, you know, it's all about the groove, man, and the other one's about you know, getting the sponsorship deals and getting the money in. And I think surfers and probably yogis too are probably both conflicted in those ways, because I mean some people want to make money out of those things. Yeah,
and I guess anything that you love, or if you're a competitive person, you could turn anything into a competitive or commercial kind of pursuit. So but it's very interesting to see that applied to something that perhaps began as a hippie kind of spiritual thing. So
yeah, and you know, I guess my angle on both surfing and yoga is it's just, you know, I like to do it to feel good and whatever, but certainly there's yeah, there's a lot of competitiveness around both those things.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's a lot of humour in when those things become competitive as well. Like you said, even just in the fact of buying a $150 yoga mat, that's hilarious.
Yeah, yeah, and that's probably on the cheap end for some, I don't know. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I lied. I am going to ask you another question before I give it to everyone else. And that's actually just going on from what we were talking about. There's a moment when Roscoe, Olivia's boss, hearing that Maya had invited Olivia to share her wave out in the surf, says, "She let you share her wave? It sounds like she lacks the killer instinct, all right." I thought that was a very interesting comment. Very interesting that a man who surfs said that about a woman who surfs professionally. I wonder if there's anything that you have to say about that.
Yeah, well, there's a very interesting surf scene here where I live, and, you know, between the men and the women, and you know, I think for a man to share a wave is a very big deal, but the girls are always sharing. So there you go. It's actually lovely how many women are in the surf here, and the sort of cooperativeness of that compared to where the guys surf, because often they surf sort of in a slightly different spot, and it's, you know, it comes to sort of blows sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually ties in quite nicely to the novel itself too, in that, you know, there's in these mysteries, there's you know, people who are at loggerheads, but also there are moments where women want to cooperate with each other despite their differences. So
and that is a big part of the book, of course, is Olivia's friendships with these girls she meets along the way.
Yes. I didn't want to not mention that. Is there? Do we have any questions, Marianne, from other people? Sorry. Tracy.
It's all good, Jo. We do have a few questions here, so we'll start with one. Let's have a look. There's one from Poppy. Oh, Poppy Nwasu. So she's another wonderful YA author, and she wants to know how Lisa found the process of writing a mystery. Did she have to pre-plot all the clues and when they would be revealed, and what was the process?
No, I had to retrofit it, Poppy. So yeah, I ended up with a big mess, and then went back through it. But sometimes, you know, when you go through things, it sort of seems like you knew more than it feels like you actually did when you were writing it, because you go back and think, oh, that's a good clue, and, you know, I'll just sort of move that around a little bit. And no, so I wrote it in a very sort of, the first draft was written in quite a very anxious sort of, I've got no idea if this is going to work out, and it's all very tricky and there's so much going on. But then when I look back on it, it seemed like maybe I had a bit more of an idea than I thought I did at the time.
Great. And Margot says she'd love to know how Lisa came up with all the different terms to describe the surf. So she says that chunderous, fat, junky mush burgers is her personal favourite.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I heard someone say that on the radio once. Yeah, so it is interesting. So that's kind of the part of the book, is Olivia's just sort of going around going, how many words are there to describe surf, as she's listening to people in the car parks and the surfers as they get out of the water. And that's the way people speak around here. You know, you go down the street and they're all talking about the surf, and there's so many different ways to describe it. And so it's really just a matter of going for a walk down my local street, and I've probably got about 10 new words to describe surf. We're definitely like the Eskimos in snow.
Awesome. And somebody else would like to know, or they're interested to hear about your other books, so the titles, for example, and what they're about and how you came to write those.
Yeah, so my first young adult book was Paris Syndrome, which is set in Brisbane, and it's kind of a romance about a girl who's just mad keen about Paris, and, you know, all she ever wants to do is get to Paris, but then she realises that, you know, perhaps Brisbane's not such a bad place either. And before I wrote the 2 young adult novels, I wrote 4 adult novels, and they're all what you kind of call romantic comedy sort of novels. My first book was Lyrebird, and I think people always say, well, in fact, it wasn't the first book I wrote, as I've just said, because I wrote The Girl with the Gold Bikini before that. But Lyrebird was my first book to get published, and I suppose it was a little bit autobiographical. It was about a woman moving from Sydney up to the North Coast and working for a wildlife agency, which is what I did. So a little bit autobiographical, that one. And then Sex, Lies and Bonsais, a story about a girl who's kind of not at all into the surf, living in a surf mad town. So again, I guess a little bit autobiographical, but I am into the surf. And then after that was Aki's Pilgrimage to the Next Big Thing, which is about a woman doing a pilgrimage around the big things, like the big banana and the big pineapple and those sorts of things. So it's kind of a spiritual pilgrimage, but she's going to the big things. And then after that was Melt, which was a rom-com about climate change set in Antarctica. I think that's it. Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I actually have a question for you, Lisa. So this one set is the flavour of Byron Bay and Gold Coast, etc. comes into this obviously a lot. And you said that Florida, the feeling of that works its way into the book as well. And I did read that you spent your childhood or grew up in Fiji. So that sounds super exotic. Did you draw some inspiration from Fiji as well?
Look, I don't think I did with any of my books that have been published. The first book I ever wrote, I think I wrote a lot of that kind of childhood stuff into it. Before I started writing The Girl with the Gold Bikini, I wrote this kind of middle grade fantasy, and I think I wrote a lot of that into that. But that's sadly, that's a book that's never going to see the light of day. It's my practice book. So yeah, so not so much Fiji, no.
You're not happy with your practice book?
No, I do sort of look at it every now and again, but I don't get the same feeling about it that I did about The Girl with the Gold Bikini, which is, was that I really think I need to do something with that. With that one, it's kind of like I look at it and go, no, I think that just stays under the bed.
It's funny how many novelists there are who have at least one manuscript that, that they wrote that they say will never see the light of day. So maybe that's about practice.
That's it. It is, yeah. You just need to, I think, who was I listening to? It might have been Neil Gaiman I was listening to, and he's saying you just need to write your way through the bad words and then you get to the good words. So, yeah. That's
a very good little motto. I have to admit, I've stolen that one from Neil Gaiman as well. Not always successfully, but it's good.
Yeah.
Sorry, another question from Susan. So she wants to know, will you write a sequel or a series of books with Olivia Grace as your central girl detective, like a new modern day Nancy Drew series? Yeah, well, look, I'd really quite like to. And in fact, I do have half a book written about it. So the answer to that is yes, I would really like to. And I've certainly got no end of ideas about what Olivia might get up to next. I've just been focusing at the moment on finishing another novel. I'm doing a PhD in creative writing, and I'm writing a novel as part of that. So I've got to finish that. I've got to put that in July. So yeah, but I definitely would like to write more Olivia Grace books, and I've got a lot of notes about it.
Oh, well, thank you whoever asked that question, because I had wondered that too.
Do you have any more questions, Jo?
It's always a dangerous question to ask me, Tracy. Yes, I do. Actually, I am interested when you were just talking about all of the books you've written, Lisa, and obviously romantic comedy is something that you keep coming back to, and it's something we didn't really touch on in our conversation. I wonder, what is it that you like about writing romantic comedies, and is it something you read?
Yeah, I read really widely, but when I find a good romantic comedy, it really sort of speaks to me. I don't know, I just love it. I love the the humor and the romance, and it's just a feel good thing, you know. And so even though I read a lot of books that are not so feel good, but when I come to one of those, I go, oh, this is my book, you know. This book's for me. So that's actually what I like, is that that kind of uplifting story that, you know, leaves you feeling good. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you watch a lot of romantic comedies as well, or are there particular romantic comedies that you really enjoy?
Look, I haven't been watching any rom-coms lately. Yeah, I've really been enjoying Sex Education on Netflix, which I think, have you watched that? That's great.
No,
And you know, yeah, so I guess, there's quite a lot of romantic comedy in that, but yeah, I think there is a lot of great drama coming out with, really nice sort of realistic characters, and not your kind of average rom-com, which is what I really like. I like things, to be a little bit quirky, edgy. Yeah.
Well, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
Oh, okay.
Rom-com musical on Netflix.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Have to watch out for that. I'll go and get it.
And I wonder, the romantic subplot of Olivia and Roscoe, I think, is a really interesting one, actually, in that they have this bantering chemistry, not too unlike the Han Solo and Princess Leia that Olivia keeps referencing. But it's also interesting in that they have this dynamic where he's her boss, but he was also her childhood playmate. So there's this kind of power differential, which could be a bit uncomfortable, but then that's balanced out by the fact that, they've always been mates. And I wonder if that's, if you could talk about that, because I found that really interesting. Yeah,
so there is a lot of potential for conflict and tension in that, with Roscoe being Olivia's boss, and also her, that unresolved sort of romantic tension between them. And I didn't want it to sort of play out with the, falling in love with your boss kind of thing, because I don't like that, and Olivia's too much of an independent girl to fall in love with her boss, so to speak. So, she's always completely felt her equal. And I suppose Roscoe's journey is sort of realising that she is, exactly that, if not more, just how amazing she is. But, I think it just, creates an opportunity for a kind of tension in them, and it just sort of raises the stakes a bit for Olivia when she's, having trouble in her job. That's sort of another way she's having trouble.
Yeah, great. No, thanks. So I thought, that must have been a bit of a challenge in terms of, balancing that differential. But obviously it's one that you met beautifully.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions, Tracy, or shall I throw out the final one?
We'll get you to throw out that final one. Thanks, Jo. That'll be great.
Okay. Well, I just wondered, this is a pretty standard question, but people seem to like to know the answer. I wondered if you had any writing tips that you would like to share with people before we go, Lisa.
Yeah.
Or the most useful writing advice you've had.
Yeah, I read a lot of books about writing. Whenever I sort of get stuck, I sort of read a book, and I suppose that's a tip in a way, is that every book that's out there has one special thing for you that you can carry into your writing. And the thing that I sort of carried into my writing most recently was just thinking about scenes as being an internal journey as well as an external journey. So I think that's something that's really stuck with me and improved my writing, is that every scene, not only must the plot advance, the character's kind of character arc must advance. So yeah, that's something I've been thinking about lately, is just trying to make sure that something like that happens in every scene.
Oh, that's interesting. And so are there particular books you've been reading and seeing that in, or is that something you're just applying to anything you're reading and looking at how the author does it?
I am sort of looking at that when I'm reading now, but that was a book I read, got on my shelf there. What was it called? Story Genius, yeah. That was talking about that. And I've also been watching Masterclass, of course. That's where I got the Neil Gaiman quote from. So that's one of my things I've been doing in ISO is subscribe to Masterclass. And I love listening to great authors like Neil Gaiman. Now I've moved on to Margaret Atwood, and Margaret Atwood, it's interesting. I was quite pleased to hear she's not a plotter. She just sort of starts with a character and works her way into it. And that idea that when you read a book you think, oh wow, this person was so clever, they knew exactly what they were doing. No that person had no idea what they were doing, but they managed to go back and sort of make it look like they knew what they were doing. And I find that quite empowering as a writer, is that even Margaret Atwood really just sort of writes without really having much idea what she's doing.
I think that's quite empowering for all of us.
Yes.
And so do you, when you say that you're reading things now and like as a writer and seeing what you can take from it, is that something that you've always done, or do you find that you do that more the longer that you are a writer?
I'm definitely doing it more now that I'm a writer, but I don't feel like it's overpowering though. I mean, I think some writers say they can never read a book in the same way again. I don't find that. I just get lost in a good book really, and then afterwards I go, wow, that was amazing, how did they do that? But at the time it just takes me away.
So you can switch it on or off.
Yeah but I certainly learn from other writers all the time. And even when I'm writing a particular book, I can get inspired in little ways while I'm there, without obviously getting too inspired, but just whatever I'm reading at the time will inspire me.
Oh nice.
Just even the tone or the humor or that kind of stuff.
Great. And I guess, sorry, I'm going to sneak in one last thing which is related to that, which is just what's the last great book that you read, or really enjoyable book you read?
Oh, what have I just read? Well, I just read Poppy Nwosu's Taking Down Evelyn Tate, and it was just my book because it was a rom-com, and a smart rom-com, and that's, as I said, when I pick up a book like that, I go, oh, I'm with my people here now.
Oh, well, I have to promise that I will not plant that, even though I work for Wakefield Press, even though I'm delighted to hear it. Seems like a nice place to close, because I know that Poppy's a fan of yours as well, so mutual fandom. Lovely.
Oh, good. Very nice.
Thanks so much for having us, Tracy.
Oh, that's okay. Sorry, there was one last question that came in there from Judith, and she wanted to know, has Lisa read The Nancys?
Oh, I have. Yes, I have. And I loved it actually, but it's quite a different sort of approach to incorporating Nancy Drew fandom than my book. But that was quite a quirky book, and I really enjoyed it. And of course, the character's also a big Nancy Drew fan, as is Olivia, so we have that in common. But my approach is fairly different to that one.
It's quite nice that there's two books that reference Nancy Drew that came out within about a year of each other in Australia. Well,
Nancy Drew's big. She's she keeps on keeping on.
Well, she doesn't need any help, but
I'm personally a massive Nancy Drew fan from way back when. So.
Oh, great!
Well, we don't have any more questions this afternoon, unless you have anything else, Jo.
But look,
I feel.
I just feel silly because I keep saying, look, one more question, and I'm like hogging the time. But I can ask one last question that I promised to be the last. Is that okay, Lisa?
Sure, of course.
I really like the way that, as the story goes, you kind of explore the question of where to draw an ethical line when investigating cases. And even though it's specific to the cases, I think it's a really interesting challenge to give a character who's finding their way in their world, in their first year out of high school, in their first real job. Roscoe says, you draw it at a point that lets you make a profit but doesn't stop you sleeping. I wonder if you could talk a bit about that ethical question and, of how to be professionally but also in the world. and how Olivia responds to that challenge.
Yeah, so I guess in a lot of jobs, that's something we face is, you know, where do you say, well, actually, I'm not comfortable with that? Because when you're getting paid for something, you know, it's easy to say, well, I'm getting paid for this, I'm going to do what it takes. And so that's actually where a lot of the tension between Olivia and Roscoe arises, because Roscoe's running this business, he's trying to make a buck, and there's got a few sort of shady characters who are trying to get him to do shady things, and Olivia sort of starts with this uncomfortable feeling in her chest that, you know, she doesn't feel that great about being on the wrong side in this. You know, she'd rather be on the other side, and then you know, that kind of builds up and builds up. But yeah, I guess that was just something that I wanted Olivia to have, was that sort of strong ethical core where she knows that when she's crossing the line into someone she isn't comfortable with, you know, she'll go that far. She wants to be the detective. She'll do almost anything, but eventually she's like, actually, no, I'm not happy with that.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool, and I do think that it's handling those questions on the job is a tricky thing for anyone, especially when you're 18 years old, and especially when your job is one that, you know, straddles that line anyway, because you're basically, you know, spying on people and reporting back on what they're doing. So
yeah, so obviously there's a lot of ethical dilemmas, and should we go on and see Olivia in another book? I'm sure she's going to have a lot more of those coming.
Excellent. Nice teaser.
Yeah.
All right, well, Tracy, I promised that was the last question, so I will I will leave Lisa to go back to the rain.
All good. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us this afternoon, and you too, Jo. Your book sounds awesome, and it's definitely sounds very far from ho-hum, to use your words there. I do know my 15-year-old daughter will get a kick out of it, and I think all teen girls would benefit from the girl power positive messages weaved throughout the story. So it sounds amazing. So thank you for sharing it with us this afternoon.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Tracy, and Jo for the questions.
No, that's okay. And Imprints Booksellers is our bookseller partner for this webinar, and Lisa's book can be ordered from them online, via email or phone, and they do offer delivery to your door. So you can find them at www.imprints.com.au or phone 8231 4454. And please keep following the Marion Library's Facebook page, our City of Marion website, and check your inbox to be kept up to date on all of the upcoming Library Through the Lens presentations and workshops.